Greetings, greetings. Welcome to Kadika OER PRSC. So we are looking at peer-reviewed data from UNESCO, published a new text quite recently. And this is amazing. This is an amazing read. There's not a lot of things that disagree. I have studied majority of the scholars' synthesis here. And I think Warren Gourdine is a biologist who does deep studies into genetics. So I already studied majority of these DNA analysts or the DNA data that he is synthesizing here. So it's good to see that a researcher is up to date and know what he is doing and talking about when it comes to modern populations versus the ancient populations. So, according to peer reviewed data, the modern populations of Egypt necessarily do not represent the ancient populations of Egypt. All right, so let's go to primary materials real quick. As a historian, uh, you know, I got to add my 2 cents. And we're going to evaluate primary materials here. So this is a depiction of a what I would most of us would, say modern Egyptian. We know that Kemet been through quite a few invasions, and those invasions happened in a succession of different periods of time within a long periods of the ancient Egyptian civilization. And as we see here, this is from the Roman period. This is a Egyptian portrait from Rome, the Roman period of Egypt, or the Roman occupation of Egypt in the Fayum. All right, so y'all can look this up and see a lot of the mummy art or the mummy depictions of modern Egyptians that resemble those from the Roman period of Egypt. All right. Now this is KB36. This is a depiction of the indigenous populations of Kemet. And you see he is very dark skinned. He has prognatism, which you see his jaw and thick nose is protruding out. And we see here that there are significant differences, right, in phenotype. One, the modern is in the Roman period, and this is in mainly in the KB36 period. All right. So this is excellent peer reviewed. Primary materials here to evaluate. As here you evaluate the modern, and then you can evaluate the ancient. As you can see differences. All right. Starch differences at that. Okay, so let's get into the peer review data here, where it says that basically the modern Egyptians are not the ancient ones. All right, are not the ancient Egyptians. And this is someone who does work in genetics and biology. And I looked up a lot of this guy here. Let's make this bigger. This guy here, y'all look him up. He's excellent biologist, and You know all about the DNA research that I do not. This is a peer review channel. We have academic integrity. So we're going to look into this data here. I'm not going to read everything. I'm on a time crunch, so we're going to go into the most important sector. All right. So there's been a thing all over the media. You know, people are trying to say that sub-Saharan Africans, we're sub-Saharan Africans. We can't represent the ancient populations and et cetera, et cetera. I know y'all hear a lot of people, say very disrespectful things. The modern Egyptians, they think they are, the ancient Egyptians. And, it's a lot of pseudoscience that float around in Africa, and it floats around in the Black community in general. So it's good to see, peer review data that confirms good research, that confirms everything that we in Kadika have been saying for a very long time, right? Good to see that type of research. Okay, so give me a sec here. All right. Now let's read this. So this is 3,700 BCE, 3,700 BCE. That's a long time, right? So let's read this. It says that pre-dynastic necropolis at Adama. So this is Egypt. And I want all you blacks to pay attention. I don't want y'all to listen to Facebook geneticists, those who like to, play with the haplogroups. They like to E1, B1, and this is that, and this is that. No, always confirm your data with peer review data. Or if not, just come to our channel and we put up the actual peer review what it actually says, right? Now it says this is a pre-dynastic necropolis in Kemet. All right. And it says that genetic analysis of the population at the Adama necropolis, more than 6,000 skeletons, including several from a children's cemetery, confirm the presence of ancient DNA related to current sub-Saharan populations. Wow. Look at that. So 6,000 skeletons. Not one, not two, not five. 6,000. More than 6,000. Let me get that right. More than 6,000 skeletons, including several from a children's cemetery, confirm the presence of ancient DNA related to current sub-Saharan populations. I'm gonna let that sink. I want that to sink into y'all. They say we have nothing to do with Kemet. We have nothing to do with the origins of Kemet. We are not related in no type of manner. People like to throw around, DNA from way later periods, like in a Roman time, and they don't like to look at peer-reviewed data. They love race-based theories, and really, it has to end in 2026. Mind you, I didn't say this. This is not my words. This is peer-reviewed data. All right. Now, it says Kribisi et al. Et al. Mean that it's other authors that authored this with him when you see the et al. But it says Kribisi, if I'm pronouncing that right, did not specify the mark is used. However, in the current populations of Adama among the Copts and the Muslims, the Y chromosome haplogroup E1B1 is present in 74% of cases, and the mitochondrial haplogroup L0F in 3% of the inhabitants. E1B1 is the most common paternal marker found in Africa, while the maternal marker L0F is common in the current Khoisan populations of South Africa and the populations of Tanzania. Wow. Could these be remnants of proto-Khoisan populations in Adama? According to new sub-Saharan ancient DNA data, ancient populations closely related to the San of modern-day South Africa were once present in East Africa. So again, we have direct relations with pre-dynastic Egypt. 6,000 skeletons, DNA related to current sub-Saharan African populations in Egypt. Among the Copts, 74% of cases, E1B1, which is the common paternal marker found in Africa. And 3% is L0F, which is common in Khoisan populations of South Africa. And the populations of Tanzania. Could these be remnants of proto-Khoisan populations in Egypt? Adama is in Egypt. See that? According to new sub-Saharan ancient DNA, ancient populations closely related to sign of modern-day South Africa were once present in East Africa. Also, the mitochondrial haplogroup L0F probably does not originate from trans-Saharan slave trade or the trans-Saharan trade, which never reached South Africa, which is an excellent point this researcher, this biologist and genetic scholar is stating here in this peer-reviewed data. So they always trying to say that the reason why sub-Saharan African DNA in Egypt and places of the Nile Valley is because of the trans-Saharan trade, but that trade never reached South Africa. This is an excellent peer-reviewed paper. So it says archaeology has also shown typical hunter-gatherer cultures in the early days of Egyptian civilization. These results on ancient DNA from the Adama necropolis are preliminary and need to be confirmed by other laboratories using new sequencing methods. So he's showing some limitations there. All scholars, all research, especially DNA, have tons of limitations that we should be aware of. All right. So I mentioned sickle cell disease and pre-dynastic mummies. And that's a common trait of, again, West Africans, Sub-Saharan Africans. Let's read this. 3 pre-dynastic mummies from Egyptian Museum in Turin, Italy, 3200 BCE, tested positive for sickle cell disease markers. The sickle cell haplotypes have not been specified, but those currently known distinguish between Benin, Senegal, Bantu, Cameroon, I'm Cameroonian, and Arabo Indian types based on specific markers found in the populations of these regions. We had hypothesized the possibility of a Benin haplotype frequently found in West Africa and around the Mediterranean today, but this remains to be confirmed. It is likely that sickle cell traits emerged in the Sahara during the humid period, were maintained under the evolutionary pressure of malaria, and spread throughout Africa with human migrations. Indeed, I don't want to even mess this word up right here, but Plasmodium falciparum, a malaria parasite, has been found in numerous mummies from pre-dynastic unto Roman times. Quite interesting. All right, so they found sickle cell disease in pre-dynastic mummies. Tuberculosis in the Archaic, Middle, and New Kingdoms in the Second Intermediate period. Research on mummies from various royal tombs from the Archaic, Middle Kingdom, New Kingdom, and late period in Upper Egypt revealed the presence of Mycobacterium tuberculosis complex. Among these signatures, the Mycobacterium tuberculosis and Mycobacterium africanum have been found in the oldest mummies. Mycobacterium africanum 1 is currently specific to West Africa and seems linked to certain ethnic groups in West Africa, according to his source here. Might this be a West African strain carried by Saharan populations who found refuge in Egypt during Neolithic times? In the absence of genotyping of these mummies, the questions is worth posing. So again, these genetic studies are finding serious links with sub-Saharan Africans, Central West Africans, and various forms of strains of DNA, from biological strains to disease type of strains, etc. So this is a real study, and he's posing questions because a lot of studies, we have a lot of limitation. My favorite, which is the royal mummies from the 18th and the 20th dynasties, around 1300 BCE. It says, in order to determine the relationship between several royal mummies from the New Kingdom, Duya, Yuya, Akhenaten, Amenhotep III, Tutankhamun, and Ramses III, the team led by Push, Zinc, and Hawaz used 8 of the 13 genetic markers, STR, from the combined DNA index system and used by the U.S. Federal Bureau of Investigation in forensic analysis. Addition to paternal markers, the paternal haplotype E1B1A found in Ramses III is widespread in modern-day sub-Saharan Africa, and particularly among speakers of Bantu languages. It really, as a linguist, again, when we're, I'm not saying this author tried to compare Bantu language with genetics, but Bantu languages is problematic, and that's another language grouping that has problematic issues with its internal genetic system. These data reinforce the idea of an ancient sub-Saharan foothold in North Africa. Wow. As suggested by meta-analysis of both paternal and maternal markers. Therefore, the sub-Saharan genetic contribution preceded the trans-Saharan slave trade, often used to justify the sub-Saharan contribution to North Africa. Wow, this is an excellent research, peer-reviewed data. We have to love it. We have to. I know others may not like this because of race theories, but this is why I'm into science, and this is why I am going to get my doctor's degree. I'm almost through with the Bachelor of Science program in history. So all of these studies mean a lot, and I'm honored to have these studies on Kadika OER. All right? Because you hear a lot of race theory geneticists who claim that we didn't contribute to North Africa. I know y'all hear that, correct? Now, it says we have estimated the ethnicity. Now, remember, ethnicity is not merited by strict haplotype or haplogroups. Like me, I'm admixed with various groups of people, but I am mentally connected with being what they call Black, which is an ancient ethnonym that most Black Africans called themselves for thousands of years. And I call myself Black, and not because of my haplogroups. That's not how we determine what Black is in majority of the cases. So your ethnicity will be kind of different than your haplotype. When I studied anthropology, cultural anthropology, they made sure we understood that fact, that your ethnicity can be by various factors. It could be linguistic nuances that determine your ethnicity. Like in Africa, you have certain tribes, African groups or African populations that look to language names to determine. So they are ethno-linguistic groups. Some people use your geography to determine your ethnic group, and some people use other determinations to determine that. All right. Now it says we have estimated the ethnicity of the Amarna mummies using STR with Pop Affiliator 1 software, and found that they had strong affinities with current sub-Saharan populations. And he give percentages of 41% to 93.9% for sub-Saharan Africa, compared to 4.6 to 41% for Eurasia, and 0.3% to 16% for Asian. So out of these groups, which was Eurasian and Asian in Africa, the quantification here, we find that the highest percentages is for affinities with sub-Saharan populations, even though limitations should be applied. But this is extravagant and remarkable data that sadly and unfortunately is not expressed as race theories are expressed. It says L. Martin, whose company DNA Tribes specializes in genetic genealogy, has gone further when analyzing the genetic markers of the Amarna mummies by using their algorithm and large database of STRs from ethnic groups. According to Martin, the majority of the Amarna mummies have strong genetic affinities with populations from the Great Lake region, Central and Southern Africa, and some have shown affinities with people from the Near East and West Africa. Hold up. Let's make that big here. Hold up. So I hear all of these Egyptians say we had nothing to do with Kemet, but DNA studies disagree. It says again, repeat. According to Martin, the majority for y'all modern Egyptians that seem like we're just making this stuff up out of thin air. The majority. We're not saying all, because if you say all, that's kind of unlikely. According to Martin, the majority of the Amarna mummies have strong genetic affinities with populations from the Great Lakes region. The Great Lakes region. So that will be probably what, near Uganda? Let's check the Great Lakes region here. Great Lakes region, what's that? Africa? Yeah, that's the Rift Valley, the Rift in East Central. Yeah, that's bordering countries including Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi. Wow, man. Let's see this map. This is a beautiful map here. And this will be like near the Great Lakes. Wow. This is the Great Lakes region. And this is sub-Saharan Africa. But remember, we have people who are saying that we have nothing to do with Kemet, and they would just ignore this. Peer-reviewed data and race theories will prevail on YouTube. So it says Central Africa, where I'm from. Well, they say my DNA, some of my DNA is from my Y, Bamileke, Central Africa, Cameroon, and Southern Africa. So the majority of these Egyptian mummies have strong genetic affinities with populations from the Great Lakes region, Central and Southern Africa, and some have shown affinities with people from the Near East and West Africa, which is to be expected. Like I said, as a historian, and I already knew before I even got into the Bachelor's of Science program that Kemet had ties with the Near East due to warfare. We always been in contact with the Near East due to warfare. So he, of course, as a real researcher does, is not exclusive, as only 8 of the 13 markers, CODIS markers, were used. All right, so 8 of 13, which is majority. In between that majority of 8 out of 13, we have the majority of the Amarna mummies that had strong affinities with Great Lakes region, Sub-Saharan Africa, Central Sub-Saharan Africa, Southern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. This with peer-reviewed data sets. All right, let's keep reading. So, of course, we know mummies from the Greco-Roman period. which you even find here, they have also different phenotypes. Not all of them look, pale skinned. Not all of the mummies from this period, some are my complexion, brown skinned. But of course, phenotype is only phenotype, right? You can have dark skinned Europeans, there's dark skinned Indians, dark skinned Asians, there are dark skinned Africans, brown skinned Africans. I'm a brown skinned African, right? But as you see here, we have this is a Roman period. Majority of these portraits, when you look at it, are this complexion and a little shade lesser here. So majority of the mummies from the Greco-Roman period from 806 BCE will probably tell a different story genetically due to invasions, outside invasions that can change a, a population group in a specific geographic region. For example, most Americans are not Native American here. Most of us are from our admixture due to other factors, complex factors that happen. Now it says the team led by Push used the new DNA sequencing method on mummies from the Greco-Roman period. Mitochondria haplotype 12, probably from Asia, was identified in one of the mummies. Only one of them. These research results demonstrate the robustness of new sequencing methods using DNA that is even partially degraded, and despite the embalming process. Ancient DNA from parasites was also sequenced on these mummies. And that's it. All right. Study of mummies from the late New Kingdom to the late period at a site in northern Egypt. A study of 151 mummies. That's significant. 151 mummies. From Abuza el-Melek in northern Egypt, dating from the end of the New Kingdom to the late period, with the exception of Nubian dynasties, was conducted by a team led by Krauss. 90 of these mummies were used to determine maternal lineages, and 3 with dates estimated at 769 to 560 BCE, 97 BCE to 5 CE, 776 to 569 BCE. So they're giving chronology, which is, you already know here, as a historian and linguist, that's what I am very much into. Had their entire genome sequenced. The authors concluded that the ancient Egyptians originated in the Near East, and that the modern Egyptians have a recent African contribution linked to the trans-Saharan slave trade. So remember this, guys, this is not what we just read further up. All of this is new to late kingdom, right? With the exception of Nubian dynasties. They didn't even do the Nubian dynasties, with the exception of that during this period. And they say from this late period that the authors concluded they originated in the Near East. And you see a lot of people on YouTube use this one. You know, this is late. This is another time zone period. So it says ancient Egypt chronology before the Common Era. So it gives the duration of these periods, Macedonian. So these are all periods of Kemet, right? So the pre-dynastic period existed the longest out of any period. And then you have the Archaic period that existed, let's say, the third. And then you have the ancient kingdom that existed probably the second longest, etc., and so forth. That's an excellent chart. Now it says, this is interesting, and this is where, as being a researcher, you must have ability to pick up on nuances. All right. So it says, these data seem to contradict the analysis of the Amarna mummies discussed above. Let's continue. However, there are numerous biases in their interpretation from the following perspectives. So this geneticist is claiming that when they, when you hear these Facebook and YouTube geneticists, they like to use that late kingdom mummy and say that, they from that source, they use that source to say, oh, they are from the Near East. But this geneticist says they are biases. They are biased. This is peer-reviewed data. This is not me. Do not take this out on me. Modern Egyptians, I know how y'all is. Y'all come over here and start to cussing and using Arabic and things of that nature. Now it says, one, statistical non-representative sample size. So they are getting on the sample size. The sample size is small. They say only 3 complete genomes and only 1 genetic marker analyzed for 90 individuals from a single location. They only did it from one location. And creation of 3 virtual population groups based solely on mitochondria, which was pre, post, and Ptolemaic period. So, of course, that's extremely biased, right? 2, chronological, which y'all already know me here. I always brought up the chronology factor, like in the arguments of Kemet. Or it means the black land. How can Kemet mean black land when black land wasn't an old Egyptian? See that? The term black land didn't exist in old Egyptian period, but people in that period were describing themselves with the adjective modifier as black in old Egyptian. See, so all real researchers look at chronology. That is, very important. Now it says chronological mummy data from 2 periods, late New Kingdom and late period, excluding 10 Egyptian periods spanning more than 3,000 years. So they only use late New Kingdom and late period. Then they excluded on purpose 10 Egyptian periods spanning more than 3,000 years. You gotta love peer review. I know it don't be what y'all want to hear, but this is what we do over here. 3, historical. No information on the origin of the tombs, nor any mention that ancient northern Egypt had been home to Asian colonies since pre-dynastic times. And this is what I always told y'all, that yes, since pre-dynastic times to old Egyptian, we've been in contact with Asia. So to have Asian elements in Kemet is not far off. Now it says, as well as to prisoners of war. Diplomatic marriages with Asian kingdoms such as Mitanni and Hittite. Remember, a lot of the race theory blacks, and this is, I'm not always getting on the modern Egyptians, not all modern Egyptians. I'm getting on some of these race theory blacks who like to parade and use Kemet as an example and say, yes, black power and all this black this. Yes, they dealt with interracial relationships, though they didn't care about race. It wasn't about your color. It was diplomatic. See, diplomatic marriages, people. Yes, black pharaohs married women from various races. This been going down for thousands of years. So y'all black men who, y'all marry who y'all, you marry who you want to marry. Don't listen to no race theory, Hitler type black guy who's trying to teach us that, all of this is bad and this is bad and that is bad. That's nonsense. Right? So yes, you had numerous diplomatic marriages with pharaonic rulers who were marrying other races, and this is how you have Asian elements also in Kemet, as well as Asian domination, which is when Asians came over and began to rule. And this is where we get the melting pot that we have now. And 4, geographical. The authors claim to have used samples from Middle Egypt outside Abu el-Melek in northern Egypt, yet there were 42 administrative regions. And I always tell people that there are 42 nomes in Kemet. The first nome is Nubia. Nubia is not a separate polity. It is actually Egypt itself. But let's continue. Sorry to go off. Yet there were 42 administrative regions stretching from north to south. And cultural differences between the south and north of Egypt have been known since the pre-dynastic era, people. Yet this did not prevent the authors from using a biased sample of mummies from a single location and generalizing it to the whole of Egypt. You see that? So this is why I tell people, unfortunately, they are sharing race theories and biased data, and they don't even know it. Because the historian craft, the craft that we are trained in as historians and linguists, but let's speak to the historian here, the craft that I am trained in is that when we're getting our sample sizes, we must keep in mind that we can't be biased. If we know that the span of time stretches 3,000 years, why would we only focus on a particular time period and then say that represents the whole of Kemet? You see what I mean? So this is real scholarship. I love peer review data. Hence is why we named the channel. Now, in addition, the authors do not mention the origin of the sample with the paternal haplotype E1B1B1. Was it for sample JK2134, JK2911, JK2888, all dating from before Islamic expansion, nor the fact it is very widespread in present-day East Africa. Similarly, many samples on this site have mitochondrial haplotypes found in Africa today, such as JK2955, haplogroup L3, JK2963, haplogroup M1A1I, dating back to 391-260 BCE and 1211 to 1126 BCE, well before the arrival of Islam and the trans-Saharan slave trade in Egypt. Moreover, though the African roots of the haplogroup prior to the trans-Saharan slave trade in Egypt have been confirmed, they are hardly discussed in this article. It says, moreover, though the African roots of the haplogroup, right, before the transatlantic slave trade in Egypt have been confirmed. So all my people that talks about the African roots of Kemet in Egypt, you are on point. Peer-reviewed data discusses that. All right. They are hardly discussed in this article. He is talking about the article that he is ripping to shreds here, that we find numerous people, including modern Egyptians, share old data that is outdated and biased. I didn't say that, but this research did. Finally, when it comes to the sub-Saharan contribution of the current populations of northern Egypt sample, the data do not coincide with maps of the trans-Saharan slave trade, but rather with data provided by L. Martin, DNA tribes on the Amarna mummies. The trans-Saharan slave trade never reached South Africa. Could this be a remnant of the proto-Khoisan populations whose dental signatures Krubisi found in Odama? So he is suggesting that sub-Saharan Africans, South Africans, right, or proto-South Africans, dental signatures was found in the Adama pre-dynastic populations. This is extravagant, remarkable research. And also he gives a map. Now, I have other data that I wish I could share with him, but I'm going to use it for my paper, for my master theory. I already have a master thesis that I want to come up with, all right, to get my master's degree. But it's more data that he didn't go into that they should be aware of. But I'm going to say that for my master thesis. Now, look at this, though. This is a map of the genetic affinities of Amarna mummies. The Egyptian population of Abusa Elimelech with current African populations compared to trans-Saharan transit maps. Look at this. So these connections are deep within sub-Saharan Africa, as we see, Central Africa, West Africa, deep within South Africa, deep within the Great Lakes regions, deep within Central Africa here, and in West Africa. All right. This is peer-reviewed data. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute. Study of two Middle Kingdom mummies, Naket, and I loved this one. When I read this probably 2 years ago, and I actually had it on the old Kadika channel, and I'm glad he synthesized the whole thing, which is what scholars do. Now it says, a team from the Manchester Museum conducted research on two Middle Kingdom mummies, Nakat Ankh and Canum Nakat, dating from 1985 to 1773 BCE, based on uniparental markers. Partial STRs for the Y chromosome failed to identify paternal markers. However, the mitochondrial haplogroup N1A1 was found in both mummies, suggesting a maternal relationship, and thus they may have been siblings. The presence of haplogroup N1A1 found in Egypt supports the hypothesis of an African origin for haplogroup M1. According to the alternative hypothesis of an Asian origin for haplogroup M1, It is possible that it arrived in ancient Egypt through African migratory waves via the Arabian Peninsula, given the prevalence of haplogroup N1 in East Africa and Yemen. Now, I have an answer for that. As a historian, I did research with why this may be. The Arabian Peninsula actually was populated by blacks in such a early time, it even shocked me. Yes. But it wasn't, of course, called Arabian Peninsula then, etc. But yes, there have been archaeological evidence of blacks traveling to Arabia. Uh, I mean, in the same probably time period as they are traveling up further in the Nile Valley as well. It says the ancient DNA data from pre-dynastic and dynastic populations currently available are not representative of the entire history of Egypt, as few samples have been analyzed. And I always tell people that they want to use these DNA evidence as Apple dicted signatures or something, or oh, I have one DNA evidence that this represents the whole. It does not. Peer review data clearly states, and this is 2025, and it says the ancient DNA data from pre-dynastic and dynastic populations currently available are not representative of the entire history of Egypt, as few samples have been analyzed. Do y'all understand this? They are fragments of a puzzle that is thousands of years old and highlight its complexity. The possible presence of a proto-Khoisan South African population in a pre-dynastic period and individuals with a type of tuberculosis well documented in West Africa, royal subjects from the New Kingdom characterized by genetic markers currently known in Central and Southern Africa and the Great Lakes region, as well as subjects from the late New Kingdom and the late period, offering traces of African and Asian markers. The data as a whole suggests that the area of origin of the ancestors of the ancient and modern Egyptian populations, which show points of kinship, should be redefined. See? Let's continue. Could the pharaonic populations therefore form a genetic mosaic resulting from encounters and exchanges between populations from the Sahara, Lake Chad, and the Near East and the Nile Valley at various periods? Only further use of molecular Egyptology can answer this question within a framework of cooperative scientific and Egyptological research, promoting new molecular genetic technologies, reproducibility, and transparency of results on representative samples. Some recommendations can already be made with regard to new excavations and mummies already available in museums. The systematic use of new DNA sequencing methods, the continuation of now standard analysis of mitochondrial and Y chromosome markers, but also other autosomal markers. The consideration of markers for African, European, and Asian genetic diseases and DNA from human parasites consistent with ecological, historical, chronological, and societal context of ancient Egypt. This is beautiful. Now let's get into where this may hurt some modern uh Egyptians, but I'm not here to hurt anyone. Just know that y'all don't represent the ancient population of the Nile Valley. All right. All right, let's read here. Hold on. This was an excellent research. Now it says for y'all modern Egyptians, y'all should take this note. Although contemporary DNA is easily accessible in present day Egyptian populations, it only partially reflects Egypt's 3,000-year history between Lower and Upper Egypt. So I hope y'all know that the modern contemporary DNA that's easily accessible in Egypt today, it only partially reflects, and that partially reflects within the later periods. Now, light on the country as a whole. So it's not all of the country. Now it says some researchers have ventured to use modern DNA to draw conclusions about the history of ancient populations in Egypt. Don't y'all see that a lot? Now let's listen closely. But as recent studies of ancient DNA have shown, present day populations do not necessarily correspond to ancient ones. Do y'all understand that? Ain't it says but as recent studies of ancient DNA have shown, all right, I like to keep repeating because it's like people like to avoid, all right, present day. What that mean? When I say present day populations, the populations of today, similar to America, like populations of America kind of does not reflect the ancient indigenous Native American populations who were here before us, right? So it says present day populations do not, okay, necessarily correspond to ancient ones. All right. And he gives examples. For example, the ancient populations of Easter Island around 1400 CE were closer to present day Polynesians than to Amerindians and current inhabitants of the island. Let that sink in, please. All right, let that sink in. All right, he gives another example. The example of the Otzi mummy, 3400 BCE, found in the Australian Alps, shows more genetic affinities with the current populations of the Tyrrhenian Islands than with the current inhabitants of the Alps. See that? So he gave two examples. All right, y'all get that? Gave two excellent examples. He said that this mummy, 3400 BCE, found in the Australian Alps, it shows genetic affinities with the current populations of the Tyrrhenian Islands than with the current inhabitants of the Alps. So the modern people of the Alps does not shows less genetic affinities with the ancient populations of the Alps. All right, so just for y'all modern Egyptians to understand that, and peace. I'm out. Oh, any questions? Any questions? I'll leave this up for like 2 minutes. All right. So I checked the comments. Everybody understood. Excellent. Enjoy your day. Stay warm. Sleep tight.